Last time around, we talked about this framework to understand the direction of the world of geopolitics, finance, technology, and sustainable development. And this framing of a new world or an old world where we base relationships around a framework that I frame as multipolar mercantilism. And essentially, the idea of multipolar mercantilism is that you have a number of different, particularly small number of very large economies that have a dominant role. You also have a small number of countries that have very large militaries, a small number of countries that have very large technological footprints. And these groups together are increasingly competing on a very focused, self-interested basis. Not necessarily Game of Thrones style to have one emerge as victorious over all of the others, but rather a constant situation where each of the different large economies are continually seeking their own advantage and mixing and matching with the others, and other groups are trying to figure out ways where perhaps they can expand to be in this select group, or to figure out how to deal with these different group members from the standpoint of maximizing their own advantage, or in particular, minimizing their own vulnerabilities, particularly from a military, technological, or economic standpoint. And from the standpoint of our themes around finance, technology, and sustainable development, we're now going to look into this from the standpoint of each individual area. One area that we highlighted as one of our themes for the remainder of the decade is this area of data. And in particular, thinking about data from the standpoint of its role in technology. Data plays a central role from the standpoint of artificial intelligence. It plays a central role from the standpoint of big data and analytics frameworks. It plays a central role really in the development of any sort of technology, whether it is something like communications or whether it is something like financial services or healthcare. And as an aspect of this multipolar mercantilism approach, we are seeing an increasing focus not only on issues around security and privacy, but particularly from the standpoint of competitiveness. Countries looking at ways to develop their data ecosystems from the standpoint of various sorts of approaches, whether building infrastructure or linking with other economies to try to maximize the amount of data that they have at hand to support their own technological development. And going forward, one of the real challenges is that you have this small group of economies, China, the US, the EU, India, each of which have very large data pools. And these data pools going forward are going to be central from the standpoint of their own security and competitiveness. Now, if you are in the rest of the world where you have much smaller data pools, you will be thinking about, one, how can we develop infrastructures? Things like open banking, open finance systems, or data sharing frameworks that will better enable the aggregation of data in our jurisdiction. Likewise, you will be thinking about how can we work together with other jurisdictions. ASEAN, for instance, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, is looking at how it might be able to have frameworks to allow cross-border use of data, and often underpinning these by systems of infrastructure. And you will all be looking at systems to try to figure out not only how to maximize the value of this data, but how to protect it from threats, whether those are cybersecurity, hackers, state actors, or fraud and crime. And going forward, this multipolar mercantilism in the context of data is going to be one of our central issues for at least the remainder of the decade.